111 people died, and many of them were children. From laboratories to living rooms, the nation learns a bitter lesson. In 1937, a new raspberry-flavored elixir of the wonder drug sulfanilamide is mixed with a solvent called diethylene glycol, antifreeze to the mechanic but poison to the patient. With no law demanding safety tests, the medicine was sold as an over-the-counter medicine for sore throats and fevers. How could this have happened?
The announcement hit the airwaves like a physical blow. A supposedly soothing raspberry-flavored medicine was turning fatal. This was the story of elixir sulfanilamide, a medicine that delivered a swift and agonizing death to more than 100 people, many of them children just beginning their lives. It was a modern tragedy, born from a desperate need for a cure. To understand the tragedy, you have to understand the hope that preceded it. Before its discovery, the world was a far more dangerous place. A simple scratch from a rose thorn could lead to a fatal infection. Pneumonia, meningitis, and childbed fever were often death sentences. Then, in the mid-1930s, sulfanilamide emerged as one of the very first effective antibiotics. It was nothing short of a miracle. For the first time, physicians had a weapon that could systematically target and destroy deadly streptococcal infections. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's own son was famously saved by it. The newspapers heralded it as a revolutionary breakthrough, a triumph of science over disease. It saved countless lives and offered hope where there was once only resignation.
The fatal decision.
The challenge was delivery. Sulfanilamide in its solid form was remarkably safe, but it was a bitter powder that was hard to swallow, especially for children. The S.E. Massengill Company, a reputable pharmaceutical firm in Bristol, Tennessee, saw a market for a liquid version. They tasked their chief chemist, Harold Cole Watkins, with a straightforward goal: make sulfanilamide easier to take. Watkins discovered the powder wouldn't dissolve in water or ethanol, but it dissolved effortlessly in diethylene glycol. It produced a clear liquid with a sweet taste that masked the drug's natural bitterness.
The powder is too bitter for the children, but it dissolves perfectly in this
diethylene glycol.
It's clear, it's stable, it's elegant.
Any toxicity tests, Harold?
It's a solvent. I've tasted it myself. It's sweet. Ship it.
He approved mass production without a single animal toxicity study or human safety trial. In 1937, this wasn't considered negligence. It was standard operating procedure in a pre-regulatory world. Pharmacology was obsessed with whether a drug could cure, but dangerously indifferent to whether it could kill.
Chapter 4. The Molecular Trick.
The mechanism of sulfanilamide was simple. As an antimicrobial agent, it worked by playing a trick on invading bacteria. Many bacteria need PABA, para-aminobenzoic acid, to synthesize folic acid, which is essential for them to grow and multiply. Sulfanilamide's molecular structure is nearly identical to PABA. The bacteria mistakenly absorb the drug instead of the nutrient. Starved of their building blocks, they can no longer replicate, allowing the immune system to eliminate the infection. But the solvent Watkins chose is a poison. It targets the kidneys and liver.
The moment the substance hit the bloodstream, it made a beeline for the kidneys. In the cortex, the outer shell that does most of the filtering, it strangled the tiniest vessels. Deprived of blood, whole neighborhoods of cells died in place, and death didn't stop there.
The poison moved with cruel efficiency, attacking the body in 3 distinct phases, based on the letters from parents and the official findings. Here is what the victims experienced: initial relief, followed by dread. Victims given the raspberry elixir for minor ailments like sore throats or earaches, often finding the raspberry flavor pleasant before the symptoms began. The drunk phase 0 to 24 hours. The body mistakes DAG for alcohol. Victims feel drunk, dizzy, and nauseous. Parents often thought their kids were just tired from the medicine. The acid phase 24 to 48 hours. The liver converts the DG into diglycolic acid. This floods the blood with acid, causing metabolic acidosis and the heart to race and the lungs to gasp for air. The shutdown phase 48+ hours. The acid attacks the kidneys. Cells swell and die, physically plugging the tubes that filter waste. The body effectively drowns in its own toxins. The most terrifying sign was anuria, no urine. Toxins rose, followed by convulsions, coma, and finally death. There was no antidote.
Chapter 6. A parent's worst nightmare.
The instrument of death, every parent in this tragedy was forced to be the executioner. They held the spoon.
Here, one big spoon.
Mrs. Marina Differ's words haunt the historical record.
All that is left to us is the caring for her little grave. Even the memory of her is mixed with sorrow, for we can see her little body tossing to and fro and hear that little voice screaming with pain, and it seems as though it would drive me insane.
Chapter 7. The Turning Point.
Dr. Stevenson noticed that several of his patients weren't just failing to get better, they were dying in absolute agony with total kidney failure, anuria. He realized the only common denominator was the new elixir he'd been prescribing. The telegram. On October 11, 1937, he sent a flash telegram to the American Medical Association AMA and the manufacturer S.E. Massengill Company, warning them that the drug was killing people. The initial denial. Massengill initially sent a half-hearted telegram back to salesmen telling them to pause sales, but they didn't explain why or mention that it was lethal.
We have been supplying a legitimate professional demand.
Sir, are you admitting people died?
Their deaths were an unlooked for result.
Chapter 8. The Manhunt.
The manhunt. As the death toll climbed, the FDA realized they didn't have a recall button. They had only 239 inspectors for the entire country, and they sent every single one into the field. It was a race against a poison that killed with agonizing precision. Agents weren't just checking warehouses, they were digging through 20,000 handwritten sales slips in dusty back rooms. In East St. Louis, an inspector found a slip for Betty Jane. No last name, no address, just a 9-month-old baby with a ticking clock in her medicine cabinet. Agents went door to door, sometimes arriving just minutes after a parent had poured the first dose. One inspector in South Carolina found a bottle on a kitchen table with the cap already off. He knocked the spoon out of a father's hand. But for 107 people, the agents were too late. The aftermath didn't just cause a scandal, it forced the birth of modern medical ethics. Massengill's owner was defiant, telling the press,
My chemists and I deeply regret the fatal results, but there was no error in the manufacture of the product. We have been supplying a legitimate professional demand.
To him, the deaths were just an unlooked-for result. It took a mass poisoning and a mountain of tiny graves to finally convince Congress that legitimate business shouldn't include the right to sell untested poison as a miracle cure. Harold Cole Watkins, haunted by the results of his formulation, eventually took his own life. Out of this tragedy came the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act FDCA. Before 1937, the FDA was basically a hall monitor with no detention privileges. No power to stop a dangerous drug before it hit shelves. No safety testing required. No clinical trials. Companies could release whatever they wanted directly to the public, and regulators couldn't touch them unless they caught them lying on a label. We're talking cocaine toothache drops for children, heroin cough syrup marketed by Bayer, the same people who make your headache pills today sold over the counter as a non-addictive alternative to morphine. Opium-laced soothing syrups for fussy babies. Radium water that was supposed to give you energy. What a time to be alive. The FDA's job at that point was basically the pharmaceutical equivalent of cleaning up after a car crash. They could only act after someone was already dead. The kicker? Legislation to fix all of this had been sitting in Congress since 1933. 5 years, completely deadlocked. 5 years of we should probably do something about this energy. Classic government move. And then 105 people died. Suddenly everybody found their sense of urgency. On June 25th, 1938, less than a year after the bodies started piling up, FDR signed the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act into law. And it didn't just patch a hole. It rebuilt the entire house. The 1938 law transformed the FDA from a policing agency primarily concerned with confiscating bad drugs into a regulatory agency increasingly involved with overseeing the evaluation of new drugs before they ever touched a single patient. For the first time, a manufacturer had to prove a drug was safe before selling it. Not after. Not when people started dying. Before. Companies were now required to conduct animal testing and submit safety reports to the FDA prior to marketing. The FDA could now inspect facilities. Labels had to actually mean something. And the old legal shield that let manufacturers skate on mislabeling charges? Gone. What had started as damage control became the architecture of modern drug regulation. The FDA became the gatekeeper of which drugs were and were not considered safe, dramatically changing the power dynamics of the entire pharmaceutical industry. The FDA's entire evolution in 3 brutal lessons: pre-1938, react after the bodies pile up; 1938 to 1962, prove it's safe first; 1962, now, prove it's safe and it works with real evidence. One company dissolved an antibiotic in antifreeze, shipped it nationwide, and killed over 100 people. And that's why the FDA exists the way it does today.